But in the meantime, I think we wanted to do a quick update for folks on your experience at SHOT Show. If you wanted to fill in kind of how your week went and some of the highlights of the show, maybe.
Yeah, SHOT Show is always a hectic time. There's so much going on. It's honestly almost become too big now from my point of view as a reporter, because there's no chance to cover everything there. Obviously for us, we take a different approach. We don't really do gun reviews or things like that. I mean, I'll give you guys some of my basic impressions of the guns I shot. I went to range day, which has been more and more fractured as the years have gone on. It used to be a lot more of the gun companies would go to range day. Now they all want to do their own range day. So Sig Sauer and Smith & Wesson weren't there. I think Staccato wasn't there at range day. They all had their own range days. So I don't really know what you're supposed to do. You're just supposed to go to 15 different range days. It's getting kind of annoying. But either way, what I did shoot there were some pretty cool new guns for sure. Glock was doing the thing where they take different parts of different guns and put them together in different combinations. So they all kind of, shot like Glocks, which if you like Glocks, you like Glocks. So you'll probably like the new combinations of, whatever 17 slide on a 19 frame or something. There was plenty of that stuff going on. There's a lot of red dots are taking over for sure. That's been a trend for a couple of years. What I'll say about new guns at SHOT Show every year is there always seems to be a trend. A couple of years ago, it was 10 millimeter. Everybody had their own new 10 millimeter handguns. Then it was last year 30 super carry, which, by the way, I feel like has kind of just drifted off.
Wasn't that a flash in the pan right there?
Yeah. Ian McCollum he liked the round. I feel like they keep coming up with these rounds that are, this is a slightly better version of what's extremely popular.
Right.
Like here's 10 millimeter. It's more powerful than a 9 millimeter. You could fit more rounds than a 45 or so. There's various advantages. There's a lot better channels to go to for the intimate details of each of these kinds of firearms out there and ammunition. But, the 30 super carry, it's got the stopping power of a 9 millimeter, but it's a little bit smaller, so you can have more rounds in your concealed carry gun. Sounds great, but until you think about it's not that much of a difference between the 9 millimeter that everybody already has and uses.
Right.
And so it's really hard, I think, to break in. This year, it was 5.7. So people might know the FN 5.7. Yep. It's been around for years as sort of the only major example of a 5.7 caliber handgun. It's sort of this miniaturized rifle round that they put into a handgun. People really like that gun. So now everybody's doing this year it was 5.7. Smith & Wesson had a 5.7. I think Rock Island Armory had a 5. There are a lot of new 5.7s. That was kind of the trend. But to me, what was most interesting were, I shot the Lago Alien again. I would love to have one of those guns. We're going to need to sell a lot more Reload memberships though, because they start at like $5,000 a piece, but it's a totally different, mechanism for a handgun than what people are used to seeing. You've got this tilting barrel Browning system that's used in almost every modern handgun. And the Lago Alien uses a fixed barrel with, a totally different recoil system, and it makes it shoot really well comparatively. I really enjoyed it. Ian McCollum, Forgotten Weapons, who we had on the show before. I don't have to have him on again. I did see him at SHOT Show. Good dude, very smart, knows way more about the technical details of firearms than I do, and did a video on the Lago Alien a while back, so people should check that out on YouTube if they have more interest in finding out about it. But Rock Island Armory actually was kind of surprising me too, because they had a new gun called the RIA 5.0, I believe is what it's called. And it also has a unique recoil system with fixed barrel and, sort of proprietary operation. The barrel square. It was very interesting, and you could tell that a real difference, in my opinion, when I was shooting. Now, these are reviews based off of a magazine through a gun. It's not. There will be much more in-depth reviews on YouTube that you guys should check out if you're interested in any of these firearms before you buy one. But that was my one of my favorite because, first of all, it reminded me a lot of the Alien in the way that it has a reduced recoil impulse, like a much smoother, lighter impulse than a traditional 9mm design does. And it only costs $900 instead of $5,000. So
it's a big upside there.
Yeah, and I shot a bunch of other guns. There was this really cool, I think it was 4570 lever action with a suppressor on it. I think it was Silencer Central spoof. That was really cool. It just made it sounded like a rocket when you're shooting, like a little bottle rocket. It's very, very cool. I don't, that's like a for fun kind of gun. A silence lever action is not your typical home defense sort of firearm. And then I shot the Hellcat Pro, which is just a slightly bigger version of the Springfield Hellcat, which I also really liked. And shot some machine guns and had my girlfriend there who was the first time at range day. She got to shoot a bunch of the guns. A lot of fun. I shot a controversial gun. The what do they call it? The We1 JR-15.
Yeah.
The California governor called a weapon of mass destruction.
That was back in the news while you were down there in SHOT Show because of that being
They
there.
changed their branding, I noticed. That was sort of one of the things. This was kind of a troll gun. I would, at least the marketing side of it last year. I noticed it at SHOT Show and I was like, this is going to be something that a lot of gun control advocates are going to get upset about just because of the branding, which was like a skull and crossbones with a pacifier thing. It was like, because it's the idea of it is that it's an AR-15, but scaled down to be smaller for kids to be able to handle it. It's, and I should say, it's not an AR-15.
Right.
It's just a .22 semi-automatic rifle that's made to look like an AR-15. It shoots fine. It shoots like any other small .22 semi-automatic rifle out there. The 10-22 or Smith & Wesson has made for years a .22 version of the AR-15 that is .22 only. Very, similar to that, but it's a little small, more compact. So it's easier to handle for kids. The idea is, well, mom and dad's has an AR. And so they want to start training their kid on how to use gun. Here's a gun that looks like mom and dad's gun. It's not mom and dad's gun, but it looks the same. It has an integrated little lock on it, built into it. But yeah, they did change their branding. I did notice that after all the uproar, they went to just a sort of simple, it's the same name. So, they haven't walked totally away from it, but it's now just like a color, orange and blue color based. There's no logo or anything. But it shot well. They had a suppressor on it. And actually my girlfriend really liked shooting that. She's 4'11". So
I was gonna say suppressed 22 is about the smoothest thing you could ever fire.
It's fun.
Yeah.
It's a good plinker gun or like squirrel gun. Right. Or a good, frankly, it is a good gun to train kids on.
Sure.
If they're at the level where they can handle a semi-automatic. Obviously you probably would start them with a bolt action. So it's just one shot at a time sort of thing. I mean, this thing comes with a 1-round magazine. So, you can, work your kid up from only having one round to work with to then moving on to the larger magazines later on. So, but, I shot that too. So that's sort of the range report. There was a little bit of political news. So for us, like, we're obviously a politically focused publication,
right?
And SHOT Show is a trade show. It's not a super political event. There are political stories that you can get out of it, but it's mainly a trade show. It's where the gun industry comes and shows off their new guns to wholesalers and retailers so that they can make business deals and order whatever guns are going to show up at your gun shop in April or whatever. And so most of it is that kind of stuff. There's the huge display floor that is just too big to navigate at all. Like it's the entire Sands convention plus the Caesar Forum now. And it's 55,000 people, I believe, was the number that showed up this year. So it's massive and impossible to navigate as a single, one person trying to cover the whole thing. But there was some political news in it. I got an interview with Michael Cargill, who is the plaintiff in the bump stock ban case that just won in the Fifth Circuit. So we'll have that published coming up soon. I also went to the ATF forum. There was a sort of town hall forum event that the ATF and FBI put on which they go every year.
Right.
It's not a new thing. But one thing that was interesting is that Stephen Gutowski, the director of the ATF, was there in person and gave a speech and did a brief Q&A, which is only interesting because one of the main criticisms of Marvin Richardson, the former acting director, who got passed over for David Shipman and Stephen Gutowski by President Biden, one of the criticisms about him, there was a whole New York Times sort of hit piece on him, frankly, was that he went to SHOT Show and spoke at SHOT Show, which is supposedly, according to gun control groups, indicated that he was too close to the industry. Well, now Biden's pick, Gutowski, was there speaking at SHOT Show, and he said he was going to speak again next year.
Right.
So the politics of that are interesting and sort of, I think, give way to what the real reason that Richardson got smeared was, and that was to make way for Stephen Gutowski, who is a failed politician. I mean, he's a U.S. attorney, right? So he has some history of prosecuting gun cases, but he never worked in the ATF like Richardson, who was a career agent. And he ran for Ohio's attorney general as a Democrat, and in a very partisan manner. He even called the election rigged when he lost. So in the lead up to his loss, and he embraced all of the standard gun control positions. So he was not as bombastic as David Shipman, who was a literal paid spokesperson for gun control groups when he was nominated, but he seemed to have the same basic pedigree in terms of this was a political appointment done for political reasons. However, I will say that during his speech, he does seem to try and take a more diplomatic approach towards the industry. He tried a lot of what he was saying is like, I'm here because I want to have a good working relationship with the industry as much as possible. We're not always going to agree, but I want there to be open lines of communication was sort of his main message that I would take away. He did talk about the recent rules that the ATF has put in place. He talked about, he's talking to FFLs, federal firearms licensees, people who run gun businesses. And there's been a lot of concern about revocation of their licenses that has really increased during the Biden administration. That's sort of been a point of emphasis at the ATF is to really revoke anyone's license for even minor paperwork errors or things of that nature. And so the number of revocations has really jumped up a lot in the last 2 years. So that was something that he talked about. And he said that he didn't think people should be having their license revoked over minor paperwork mistakes or errors. So he did sort of take he sort of gave some ground on that point. Whether that translates into action is obviously an entirely different question, but that was the message he was putting forth to these dealers. And he did talk about the new rules, specifically the pistol brace rule. There was a question and answer session where he was asked, and these were I didn't get a question in, unfortunately. These were sort of pre-written questions, I guess. But he was asked about, actually the first question he got, he didn't seem to understand properly. which is somewhat interesting in and of itself because he seemed, it was a question about pistol braces and what gun dealers are supposed to do with the current inventory they have, given that the ATF is essentially saying that they're all going to become NFA regulated short barrel rifles. And for some reason, he thought this question was about unserialized firearms. And so he gave an answer that didn't have anything to do with the question. He did later on talk briefly about the idea that apparently, according to him, if you just remove the brace from the gun, it's no longer an SBR. It would then revert back to being a pistol. So that was one option that he gave for what people could do. That's something that was talked about in the rule itself. There wasn't really a lot in there that was that isn't in the rule itself. He didn't give a lot of new information or give much detail. And neither did, frankly, the panel. They had a whole panel of ATF officials, and honestly, none of them gave really much insight. And that was something I could hear people remarking on around me while this was happening. But
I was going to ask, how was the reception in the room when he spoke about these new rules? I think a lot of people were wondering how the ATF was going to be received because they showed up right after these new rules dropped.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing to keep in mind about this event is that everyone in attendance are people who work in the industry and have to work with the ATF
right
for their livelihood. Like whether they like what the ATF is doing or not, they have to be able to understand what the agency is going to do, like how they're going to proceed with enforcement, or else, they could get arrested or be out of business tomorrow. So it was a professional atmosphere. It was clearly not a happy one. And there were plenty of times where people scoffed at things he was saying or made, comments about how what he was saying didn't make any sense, or how he wasn't really giving any new information to, the people in the crowd, certainly not the information they wanted. This is sort of the situation where, obviously these dealers are, I'm sure some of them are part of the lawsuits that are going on against these rules, whether it's the ghost gun rule, the unserialized, homemade gun rule, or the pistol brace rule, which frankly affects way more people, millions and millions of people. But they're not, this wasn't a speech at the NRA where you have a lot of activists who are just there to boo or whatever. These are people who have to figure out what the ATF is going to try to do to them and their businesses. So, it wasn't, they were there to try and understand what this agency is going to do in terms of enforcement for their businesses. So, it wasn't like a raucous thing. There was certainly very obvious that the people in the room disapproved of what was being said by their body language and some of the comments that they were making, but they weren't shouting out or trying to shout him down or anything like that. And there was polite applause when he finished his Q&A, talking about how, he presented himself as, the head of an agency that the people in the room have a constitutional right to be in dialogue with and have communication with, whether they always agree or not. That was sort of his approach to the situation. So, people gave very polite, if muted, applause to that point. But yeah, it's pretty obvious that everybody there was very unhappy with the situation.